Transformation happens as we choose this, as we choose truth, as we choose the intention to be a loving person. Nature isn't always kind, right? It has its law. And in the spirit world, there's a law. And choosing love will never fail.
Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments. I speak with thinkers, authors, artists, teachers, and everyday humans who have touched the edge of the ordinary and found something to bring back. This week, Dr. Patricia June Vickers is passing through. Dr. Vickers is a poet, an artist, a writer, and an internationally respected psychotherapist specializing in trauma, particularly of First Nation peoples. She's a member of the Eagle clan from the village of Gitxaala, in what is today called Canada, and carries a traditional name from her village as well as from the Nuxalk Nation in Bella Coola. Dr. Vickers has completed trainings that include spiritual direction, neurofeedback, deep brain reorienting, somatic experiencing, and compassionate inquiry. She grounds her clinical service on traditional ceremonies and spiritual principles. She teaches spiritual transformation, healing trauma, the meaning of forgiveness, and unearthing layers to find the authentic self. In our conversation, we talk about trauma. We talk about Indian residential schools. We talk about dominator mentality, the overlap between Christian teachings and native wisdom traditions, the supernatural, and the importance of respect, forgiveness, and love as a pathway for keeping a clean heart. I really enjoyed this conversation with Patricia. Her energy, her authenticity, her care. I enjoyed slowing down with her and feeling into the ceremonial space that we were creating. I hope you enjoy this conversation too. And if you feel called to find Dr. Vickers, I will include links to her websites in the show notes. As always, be good to one another, and I will talk to you next time. Enjoy the conversation. Okay, Dr. Patricia June Vickers, welcome to the Passing Through podcast.
Thank you.
I am really happy to speak with you today because when I first discovered who you are after watching The Eternal Song by Science and Non-Duality, I really loved the way that you spoke and I wanted to reach out to you. And when I reached out to you and saw your website and saw that you are a psychotherapist, an artist, a writer, a poet, and an internationally respected leader in the field of trauma research, specifically for Indigenous people, I was even more excited to speak to you. So I'm really happy to have you here, and I hope to talk about some of those things and also have you share your story. But before we do that, maybe just a quick aside on something we were speaking about before we started recording, which was this interesting relationship between host and guest, where for me, I like to see this space as co-creative, where we are kind of equals, going into the conversational waters, into the unknown and seeing what emerges without an agenda. And I know this conditioning we receive in modernity often puts this power imbalance between the guest and the host, and I want to try to dissolve these types of hierarchies. So we decided that that was an interesting beginning point to start our discussion. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this topic.
Right, right. Thank you. What I said was that I'm in your territory. So you invited me. You invited me to what it is you're offering to the people. So acknowledging that invitation is to come back to how we met and that we're both working for the good of the people. So when we go into someone else's territory, we're acknowledging that they're the caretakers of that territory. And the key word is respect. So how we do that really is we're always touching or standing on that home plate of respect. And so we don't need to get caught up in oppression and the dynamics of oppression because we know it exists. Because as long as humans exist, as Freire said, oppression will exist. But that's not what we're concerned with. So that's where I come to when I acknowledge that I'm in your territory. It's out of respect for the work that you're doing for the good of the people.
Thank you. Thank you for offering that perspective. And I think that's an important point that you're making there. So thank you for that insight.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add one more thing, and that's that I'm from the meeting of two cultures. My mother's parents were from England, and they met in Canada and had 8 girls. My mother is the third of 8 girls born to John Freeman and Sophia Braithwaite. My mother, when I asked her, I was in my mid-30s, and I asked her why she didn't raise us in her culture. And I saw in her eyes this huge sadness arise, and she said, well, I don't know my culture. She was raised in a Methodist family, and as a young woman, she went to Prairie Bible Institute to study to become a missionary. And at that time, they took teacher training and I guess the basics of nursing. And she wanted to go to China. And that was in the early 40s. That wasn't possible. And she traveled throughout BC doing what was called daily vacation Bible school. That was her missionary work, all these small places. And then she wound up in the north, where the Anglican bishop was looking for a federal day school teacher for the village of Gitxaala. And that's where my father's from. My father's mother is a Kispidwara, killer whale, from the village of Gitxaala. And my father's father is from Bella Coola, and they met in St. Michael's Indian Residential School, where my grandfather really did not spend very much time. They married really young, had 9 children together, and my father is the third of 9. So, so they met in Gitxaala and married and had 7 children, and I'm the sister died before me at birth, and then I was born, and then my youngest brother. So I'm second to the youngest. So that's my lineage and my connection of where I'm from. And we often, traditionally, that's how we start when we introduce ourselves. I'm 70. I turned 70 at the end of June. And at that time, in the early 60s, it was unusual for a white woman to marry an Indian man. wasn't unusual for the other way around, where an Indian woman married a white man.
Mm.
So when my mother married my father, there was still segregation in Prince Rupert, and Indians, as we were called, and I was called until things began to change. I think I was in my late teens and early 20s when it went from native to Aboriginal to First Nations and now it's Indigenous. How crazy is that? So I think too that's why it's important when we introduce ourselves that Indigenous is like a pan that doesn't tell you where anyone's from,
Yes.
where their roots are. Yeah. So that's my parents, and Indian residential school played a really big part in the trauma that existed in my family, in the family that I grew up in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that context. And I think probably for some listeners, it could be useful to talk a bit about the Indian residential schools because a lot of people probably don't know what that is. But from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, these were effectively concentration camps for children. Children were forcibly taken from their families, they were starved, they were beaten, they were tortured, sexually abused, experimented on, subject to forced
That's
labor,
right.
and killed. So this was some
That's
pretty
right.
gruesome, atrocious institutions.
Yes. And when you think that the purpose of them, the said purpose of them, was to civilize, that's war. That's not civilizing.
Mm.
Those are all war tactics. So I think it's true, there's less acknowledgement in the United States.
Hmm.
So in the two countries in North America, in Canada, we've had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is an enormous research project. When you look at the history of violence in our not just Indian residential schools, but also in legislation. So we have the Indian Act and the Department of Indian Affairs. In the States, it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is also not about civilizing, but about annihilating.
Hmm.
And it's what you were speaking to around host and guest. It's really not about host and guest. It's about domination and control through violence. So, really, I think Indian residential schools are um, one of the prime examples of that domination through violence.
Yeah. When I was doing some research on the topic before our talk, just so I would have some basic literacy in what we were talking about, to me, it was this really sinister union of church and state where you have people in the name of God working with government institutions to commit cultural genocide on a native population. And
Yes,
what shocked me about that, I mean, it's shocking in and of itself that that happened and is still happening today, but that these schools were still closing in the 90s. Like, that's not even that long
right,
ago.
right. And then we have in Kamloops the 215, the through what is the equipment called? It's land. It's like a land sonar. I don't remember the exact name of this
Get
equipment.
ground penetrating radar.
Yes, there we go. Thank you. And I was called into one of the interior communities because they had found the 215 remains. And that's only where they were searching. So most likely there were more. I think the wake up call for Canada was that here was concrete evidence of children being killed. And that doesn't include the babies that were born to children through rape from the principal or the bus driver or the priest. And those babies were burned in the incinerator. So so how many more besides the 215, we don't know. But I have, as a psychotherapist, I have had in a group a man, an elder, who was forced to bury dead children at an Indian residential school. I've worked with a man some years ago, over 20 years ago now, who was one of three who ran away in the cold of winter. He was the youngest of four children who ran away to go home. And a short time later, they found the frozen dead bodies of three of the children who were in a heap. And underneath these three children was the youngest still alive. He survived it. He still spoke his language, but he was living a life of torment, probably from surviving, but also now we know so much more. Also, as a young child, what he'd witnessed in a very short period of time.
These stories, when I hear them, they produce a visceral response in the body. It is the pain and trauma, and these are things that humans shouldn't have to endure. And the thing that hurts me more than that is that these are pains inflicted on humans by other humans. And what you were talking about just now about the language, I was reading that at least 60 languages were erased by the Indian residential schools. So we have this trauma, we have this kind of erasure where you're not just breaking people, you're fragmenting families, you're alienating them from each other, from their language, their culture. But this, as you're alluding to now, creates these ripples of trauma that span generations. And
Yes.
maybe we could talk a bit about that, because this is something that you have a lot of experience and expertise in. And what's your take on all of that?
Right. So first we see colonization as a curse. First, we see it as a spiritual act that comes from evil, not from good. You know, if we say there's good and there's evil. And also I've said this a number of times, that a curse cannot be reversed. So when we talk about deconstruction, we're talking about reversing something that's been created or developed. So we can't reverse a curse. A curse can only be transformed.
Mm.
So that's what the medicine people will say. So we look at how to annul a curse. Because if we look at reversing it, then we're talking about bad medicine.
Mm.
Because I don't want to do to those who have harmed me what they've done to me.
Mm-hmm.
Or, when I think of, as a child, I was sexually abused, so it was incest throughout my entire childhood. And for a long time, I didn't realize that I was living with hatred, and that I actually hated especially my father. So we have this push pull, and I see It's not only with incest when we look at attachment disorder. It's that we're all born to a woman, and Jaak Panksepp has really done some wonderful work around the neurobiology of emotion. And one of the ones that he identifies, and I think the most important one, is seeking. It's a primary, fundamental, he calls it an emotion, but it's not. Well, emotion is energy. Yeah, it's energy. So when we don't have our mother the way we need our mother as an infant and as a child, then we're left with this deep seeking. We're looking for that validation, for that love, for that acceptance, for that holding us. And not because my mother was evil, but because my mother lived through 2 wars, and there's a lot I don't know about my grandparents on my mother's side, but she married my father. And so we have 2 histories of trauma coming together to create a new unit. So we're looking at what's the foundation then? Well, the foundation always first is spiritual, and gaining an awareness of when I'm moving into that field where it's about domination and destruction, it's about control, then I know I'm aligning myself with that curse, and I don't want to. So again, I'm going to spirituality and not the Christian church because of the incredible distortion we have of the teachings of Christ in the Christian church today.
Yes.
But to his teachings that aren't cut clear and simple. You really have to meditate and be with them to understand.
There's actually there's a few questions I have based on the stuff that you said, but the one that just sprang up that I want to grab at before I lose it is, given your unique cultural composition, do you, or would you say that there is overlap between the teachings of Christ and the kind of ethical frameworks that are present in Native tradition, in the Native tradition of your father's culture?
Definitely.
And
Definitely.
what would those be, for instance?
Well, what I started off with when I was describing you as host and me as guest was respect is the key. It's the center. And so, what does that mean? Well, it means that, and we have a saying, a clean heart. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. Our people know and have taught, I think, as cultures around the world, the importance of one heart, one mind. And we want it to be for the good. That's the intention. So when you have an ancient culture where those are the fundamentals of the teaching, and then we have sacred stories called adawch. And in our adawch, there are ones that belong to chiefs and houses. And I'm not to tell those stories unless I have permission and they want to know for what purpose I'm telling, which I had to do for my doctoral dissertation. I got permission from the chief and told him how I was going to be using his adawch. So adawch are sacred stories, and they're about human encounters with the supernatural.
Okay.
So there's already this belief of a supernatural world and a natural world. And then we have stories where the supernatural and the natural have joined together, and a half supernatural, half natural being has been born. And in Tsimshian, Gitxaala, and Tsimshian, all Somali speaking peoples, that we would talk about Khamsam, or in Gitxaala territory, he's Wigyet, and he was half supernatural, half human. So you think of that, of course, you know, he was a trickster and he was greedy, and all of these human characteristics would come through. And what always saved him was his ability to laugh at himself.
Mm.
Maybe not learn and change from his greediness, but he had the ability to laugh at himself. So you have that, you have respect, and then come these teachings from someone who, a human who lived in a way that humans had never lived, and a human who claimed to be one with God. So that wasn't unusual, nor was it unusual that he would be born of a virgin. So all of these parts of the history of Christ, where the church has, we're not really going to talk about that part that much because we don't believe in it, because it's not possible. So whereas I'm seeing, as I learn more about where I'm from, that the elders that I knew when I was young had an understanding of the mystery. They didn't have to explain it. They just wanted to live it.
Mm.
But, you know, it got harder and harder to live it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some more things that are springing up. Thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. I'd love to even speak more about that, but our time is limited, and there are more things to discuss, because this topic of supernatural is interesting. Because on your website, I had read something that was moving, and I have it written down here, and it was, ceremony has taught me the most important and profitable actions in life are grounded in the ability to wait with faith in the supernatural. And I read that and I felt something stir, but I wonder what that means to you, if you could shed some light on that quote, because I think it's an important one.
Well, we're in ceremony right now, you and I. There's this space between us. I mean, yes, it's virtual, but in spiritually, and we're both spiritual beings, and the people who are listening are spiritual beings, and we have this space that's neither I nor you, that's this sacred space, and we choose to come into it being as, you know, our authentic selves. I think maybe a good example of it would be that being conditioned to choose partners who were suffering, like my father, and to work to be of value to them, which was an impossible task. The relationships ended, and the time that I spent, it got shorter and shorter, until finally I made a vow with Creator God and said, I will not do that again. And that was 13 years ago. And I was reading a book by, he's a Polish Anglican priest living in the States. Let your heartbreak be your guide. I was reading that book, and I asked myself, and this was just February or March this year, and I asked myself, I have so many heartbreaks. What's my greatest heartbreak? I have 4 adult children and 10 grandchildren. And it's that my children were born into this seeking that I was doing from my father, for real love for my father, and validation from my mother. And I saw the suffering that it created in the lives of my children. And then there was this question from the other side, and it was, and now your grandchildren. So 13 years ago, that's why I stopped. And I saw all of this, and I thought, okay, my greatest heartbreak is how I mothered, or how I failed to mother. And so I contacted 3 of my 4 children who were in relationship with me, and I asked them if they wanted me to spend time with them, a couple of months, which would mean I'd put everything into storage and they would be my priority. I didn't know how I was going to live financially because I've always worked, done contracts, worked helping people heal from trauma. And the 3 of them said yes. It didn't take 24 hours for them to get back to me and say yes. I thought, what a blessing that is. You know, how many adults, no whatever way, do I want to engage with that again? But no, the 3 of them said yes. And so I'm now with the second one out of 3, not knowing what's coming about. So I with some of my women friends who are close to my age, they were, you're doing what? Whoa. Because as we get older, we want the security of home, and we want to feel, always we want to feel financially secure. So I would say that it's a quest of learning what love is. What does it mean? How do I actually live it in relationship? It's not a warm fuzzy. It's it comes from those times when we were children and in nature we were hurting, and so we went to a secret garden, or we climbed a fruit tree, or we went to a big rock by the lake. We had that wisdom to go somewhere, a pet dog, somewhere that connected us with nature. And I would say it's that feeling that's growing and becoming more consistent. Stronger isn't really a right word, because it's not about volume. it's more about reality, if that makes sense to you.
I think it makes sense. When you shared that, I mean, I just want to say a couple of things. The first about being able to have that opportunity to go and kind of do that repair and make amends or make things right. It's kind of like an ancestral healing that you have the opportunity to do this. What a gift! I was really touched by that, but that you're doing that right now, and that's really beautiful and embodies what you're saying, I think, about love and resilience and respect and yeah, trying to be of one mind and work for good and this kind of thing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I think that's beautiful and important. So I was touched by that. I even had some tears in my eyes at a point. So thank you for that. Um, and then the other thing that you said about as children feeling hurt or feeling in need and going to natural places, whether that's an animal, a rock, a stream, a forest clearing, and that intersection with the supernatural and the animate world, like, you know, the spirits that may be in these places that you can enter into dialogue with or have some kind of transformative realization or energetic exchange, like when you were describing emotion as energy. So I was feeling these things as you were speaking, and am I on the right path? And was I following along with you? If this was the stuff you were getting at,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to dig more into that because you've done so much work around trauma and healing. What role does nature play in that healing? Because to me, it seems like it could play a vital and deep role, but I don't often hear people talk about that so much. What has been your experience there? Is there an intersection there?
So let's explore the way in which you're thinking. Okay. So when you talk about role of the natural world, tell me what you mean. What does that question rest in? What thought and belief process does that rest in?
For me, more and more I perceive people and nature, people are nature. We are inextricably bound up. We are all kin, right? We are in this deeply relational, reciprocal kind of interaction or engagement with the natural world. Unfortunately, in modern times, it seems that our relationship to nature has become extractive, it has become exploitative, and we have kind of rendered it inert and it's no longer alive to us. It's just a thing. And to me, it's not just a thing. It's it's where we come from. It's our home. It is the host, and we are guests. It's our mother, right? So when I think of nature, I think that there is, when you were saying you didn't get the validation from, or people don't get validation from their mothers, and it results in this seeking. I think if we are robbed of that experience of this mothering quality of nature, we find ourselves estranged, fractured, and kind of seeking and lost. And so I think some trauma comes or may have roots in this. And this is kind of the place that my question was coming from, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Well, you use the word role
Okay.
when you're asking the question. So that word role then rests in that whole belief system about nature is to be dominated and
Yes.
controlled. Yes? Okay. So if we think about Genesis, uh, Creator God spoke and this came into being. Creator God spoke and then this came into being. So one after the other was coming from the voice of Creator God. So that's who we're, as children, who we were going to. We were going to that voice that gave us a sense of being held, being nurtured, that gave us a sense of safety. Certainly it did for me. I went to a secret garden. I climbed a willow tree. I climbed a cherry tree. Yes. And that's what I was going for, safety and nurturing, to be nurtured.
Mm.
And that's what I experienced. You know, Genesis is in a dawach. It's a sacred story, but not story in the sense of something that's not real. Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit? I just want to make sure I follow.
Which part of what I just said?
The last part, the Genesis is a story, and the reality of the story, and this part.
Right. So I was introduced to Krishnamurti in 2013. And he talks about distortion a lot. So when you were talking about the domination and the control of nature, you're talking about distortion, which is real. It's a reality. And just as real is the fact that nature cannot be destroyed. The voice of Creator God cannot be destroyed. So when we're talking about real, that's what we're talking about. Even my eldest brother, my two oldest brothers are both artists.
Mm.
And together they created a print called Cedar Snags out of heartbreak for what was happening to the land on Vancouver Island through logging. So even when you've got all these stumps, or when fires come and destroyed it, you have this life that comes. Of course, there's concern that the consuming is outweighing the replenishing and the repair,
Yeah.
the greed.
Yeah.
Which
It's
is a whole other pathway,
yeah.
but real.
Yes, also very real. But maybe one we don't need to rehash so much here. Maybe we could talk more about the trauma, and the transformation of trauma and suffering, because you mentioned
Right.
art just now. So it sounds like art is something that runs in the family, because you yourself create art, and that also seems to be an important aspect of transformation, like this creative.
I think, yes, I think expression, a way to express without words these experiences that we have, either seeing or firsthand. We're either witnessing or it's firsthand experience. I think expression is really important. You know, whether we're doing it through dance, you know, through movement, physical movement, or we're painting, or whatever it is we're choosing to do. I think in a lot of ways, athletes are also artists, you know,
Mm,
the discipline that it takes to run a marathon.
yes.
Yeah. So I think it's the expression that's important, and perhaps why I wasn't really keen to go into the darkness of incest, but simply for there to be a shadow, because so many people have had experience of betrayal with their parents. And we all know the darkness of that and the emptiness of that and the shame in that. So I don't need to make that larger because everyone has experienced shame in their relationship with both parents. So to me, it's, well, what's helped me? If I look at my childhood, I'm grateful that I I survived it, that I'm sane, that I didn't lose my mind, that my body to date is in good health. Those are incredible blessings. And for me, an acknowledgement that Creator God does exist.
Mm.
So just starting with gratitude of what it could be, because I've seen people riddled with arthritis who've survived a childhood of incest, or drug addicts, or alcoholics, or so many other recreating of suffering, you know. So I see in my life the most important resource has been through land-based ceremony. So out of the church and looking at the teachings of Christ in union with land-based ceremonies like a fasting lodge, or we call it a vision quest as well, or a sweat lodge, or on the coast we bathe, and it's that cleansing knowledge is passed down through the mother. And so my mother was white, so I didn't have aunties, my mother's sisters, to go to teach me and to help me when I first menstruated, and all of the things that are done to acknowledge that being human, and how important respect is. How important respect is. That's what ceremony also is. It's teaching us how to respect whatever it is that we're coming up to face. So it's a challenge. Okay. So I need to respect it. Why? Because it's going to teach me. It's going to teach me more about what love and forgiveness is and what it means. So learning to love myself for my shortcomings, learning to forgive myself for my failings. You know, what I'm doing now is I'm telling my children, you matter. You have value that cannot be replaced ever. And I love you as your mother. You know, just that constant need to come back to forgiving myself as I remember something else. As I remember something else. You know, that's the journey of transformation. There's this big movement to knock the 12 steps.
Mm.
Really, that's something that helped me. Admitting that I'm powerless has been a really, really important step. And it still is, you know, in my life. Things that I'm able to do, and also the serenity prayer,
Mm.
accepting the things that I can't change, the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Those are very useful nuggets of wisdom. So thank you. And there's one in particular though that I'm very curious about, because it's maybe I mean, they're all difficult. Like, I wrestle with giving myself love. I wrestle with forgiveness. I wrestle with surrender. You know, these are all very tricky things, but particularly the notion of respect, because respect may mean different things to different people. And
Mm.
this is sometimes where I get tripped up, even trying to respectfully dialogue with the land, let's say, like to go into a forest in a way that says, I'm here in peace. I'm here to appreciate you. I come, I'm no threat. But even, and that's something that's a non-human, entity. But even with humans, even with myself, the cultivating respect is not so easy. And you said something when you were speaking about being like taught, like we almost have to be taught to be respectful in a way. And then when I look around, I don't see many elders, for me and my circles, who are teaching how to respectfully dialogue with X thing. And so I wonder if you have any pieces of wisdom about respect, because I think it's so important. I think you're so right that it is vital that we do that. And I think for a lot of people, they are not sure how to do it. They say, yeah, that's important. I want to do it. But, in language, it's easy a lot of times. You have the respectful way to, the clause, or I forget what it's called. Um, it's going to bother me now. But there's a respectful way you can say hello to someone, or there's a respectful case. But like from practical perspective, how do we enter respectfully into a space or with somebody?
Mm-hmm. For my journey, and as a psychotherapist, what I work to help people do is to be truthful, especially for those emotions maybe that we've had towards a sibling, of jealousy, of envy, resentment towards our parents. When we encounter nurturing and safety, and we stay with that love, then these non-aligning envy, jealousy, hatred energies are shown. They're shown in me. I see them. And, we have thousands and thousands of years of believing in the supernatural. And as I have chosen over and over again, and will continue to choose over and over again, to turn my will and my life over to that power for the good. I can't tell you exactly how, but this transformation has been happening inside of me. And that's where it starts. Christ, when he was talking to the Pharisees, said, outside you're all this and you're all that and you're religious and blah, 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 blah. Inside, you're rotten.
Hmm.
You're rotting. So, taking care of, we say, cleaning the heart, keeping the heart clean, keeping our blanket clean. Our blanket has our crest on it. They're called button blankets in after contact, shell buttons, and then the crest of who I am and my name. I have a blanket because I don't have one, but I would have one if I was given one with my name. And that would be my name. That this blanket would go with. And to keep it clean means to live a life of respect. So, transformation happens as we choose this, as we choose truth, as we choose the intention to be a loving person. Nature isn't always kind, right?
Yes.
It has its law. And in the spirit world, there's a law. And choosing love will never fail. I've been through, since May, I started this journey. There have been a lot of lessons that I've learned. But coming to the place to seeing that my children are actually this beautiful renewed relationship with my children is working a transformation in me. And the transformation is forgiving myself. That's huge. And I never anticipated that my children would be teaching me this. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I just want to honor the space with some silence. So,
And may we all go to that place. Maybe it's calling, that place in nature when we were a child, when we felt safe, when we felt wrapped, embraced. For however long, may we all renew that inside of ourselves. It's not outside, it's inside. That light, that desire for love and to be love.
thank you. And I know we're at the end of our time. So I think you've beautifully closed the space, but I want to reopen it a little bit just to give you some space at the end to tell people where they could find you, if there's anything you want to share, if there's any final words or things that you didn't get to say that you wanted to share. So just, I want to give you the last few minutes to use as you please, as you choose.
They'll find me just as you did, if that's what they need to do. So, yeah.
Okay. So thank you for passing through with me, Patricia. It was an honor to speak with you and be in ceremony with you and share some space for a little while. So I'm very thankful for your time and for having the chance to speak with you.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you, dear listener, thank you for your support, for your attention, for spending some time with me and this episode's guest. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe, rate it, like it, tell your friends about it. Your support really does mean a lot to me. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you for passing through today. Yeah, you,